So, a little backstory. I'm 21 years old now, and I still live at home. I'm trying to go to school. When we moved in, the house was brand new, just built. So we were the first 11 tenants. I don't think I'm afraid of them. Maybe I'm crazy about them. That's all. My first experience was like this. When I was 12 years old, I had a cable in my bedroom that was connected to my computer monitor. One night, I think it was around 11 o'clock, I turned the TV up to maximum volume and turned on the screen. It startled me and the cat. I jumped out of bed and quickly turned it off, and as soon as there was silence, I heard footsteps from the laundry room and the slamming of the garage door. A few days later, I was lying in bed reading a book. I saw the door and remembered it clearly. An empty face. I thought I looked inside, but then it carelessly disappeared. A few months after this incident, I started going to the kitchen. One day, around 11 p.m., I went back to the kitchen to eat. But for some reason, I decided not to turn on the lights when I left, but to turn on the lights only in the kitchen. Well, the hallway. Before I went into the kitchen, I looked to my left and saw the dining room table and something standing on the table in the corner. And you can't see it. It looked like someone was standing there in a sheet or something like that. I looked. I have to stay calm for 10 seconds and then relax. I tried to turn on the light. I looked around and whatever was there was gone. Things were relatively calm after these events. Another small event came to mind. I was usually writing there. I just didn't sleep well. But I thought. Now everything I saw seemed too real to be a figment of my imagination. It was night, about 1 hour in the morning. I think it was just before morning when I was sitting on the living room couch watching TV. The sound was as if a huge bird had crashed into me, which it may well have been. 1. In my opinion, it was unlikely. Finally, I gingerly looked inside. I convinced myself that it was probably a bird hitting a window or something. After a while, things started to disappear. When I was 13 years old, my father. One morning, he woke me up earlier than usual. I asked my father where my lunch bag had gone. It's in the other pocket of my backpack. I could have checked myself, but it wasn't there. I was confused. I just thought. I left it at school or something and fell asleep. An hour later, I took my morning jog. I checked my bag a second time and found that my lunch bag was in the same pocket. It was. My father swore to me that he had never found it. I believed him. I'll be honest. When I checked my bag, it contained the remains of yesterday's lunch. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and I honestly can't explain it. When I was about 14 years old, I came home from school one day and found the bathtub disassembled and neatly stacked in the toilet tank. I called my father and he called me. He wouldn't touch it and blamed it on me. That's pretty weird for a 15-year-old. I was actually in the shower when I noticed it. The water was pretty cold. I couldn't use all the hot water, so I turned the faucet off. Then I saw that the handle was cold. A ghost or someone else was trying to get me to wash my head. I had to use cold water first, but now it's for 2. I want to share some of my scariest stories with you, but one of them may not have been paranormal. It could have just been an animal, but it was still scary. I'm sorry, but I'm 17 now, and I've always been afraid to look out the window at night. I can't explain it. I'm scared. I was lying in bed one night. I had just talked to my girlfriend on Skype. I looked out the window and my bed was right in front of the window, so I was lying there. He replied. One of the curtains was pulled back, and there was writing on it. And when I blinked, his reflected eyes were looking back at me. My house is 1 story, but it has windows. Whatever it is, it's too high off the ground for a raccoon or possum to write like that. 10 seconds ago, I just disappeared and had an argument with my girlfriend. Then I couldn't sleep for 5 days because I was so scared. Last week. Around 4 a.m. I got up to go to the bathroom. The restroom was in the hallway. When I came out of the restroom, I stopped. I stopped and looked straight into the kitchen. It was only a few feet away from me. I didn't realize it right away, But there was something there. It was standing there. And as soon as I noticed it, it went away. My parents were asleep at the time. Just a few days ago, I saw my girlfriend go to the bathroom. Then she texted me and asked me if I was in the bathroom. The bathroom is divided into a toilet and a bathtub. There is a door between the sinks, and he said he heard banging on the countertop and something moving. Thank you for asking. I can't explain it very well. Do you have any idea what it was? So, before we start talking, a little bit of backstory. My family moved. When I was 14 years old, the house had just been built, and we were the first ones to move in. That's right. My parents, my sister and I were there, and we got together as a family for years. When I was 15, we would all get together and have parties and have a good time. However, at one of them, I was sitting in the living room. I was sitting in the living room with one of my cousins. Or, I was in the Ito room. The living room is connected to the kitchen. You can sit anywhere. You can always see the garbage cans. My cousin and I were talking at the table, and at some point we both turned around. We were chatting, and at some point we both turned around. I saw the lid of the trash can. The lid was flipped off. We stood up to see if he was going to get up. We throw something out and find everyone still playing or chatting. In the same room, we decided it was a vent over the trash can. Nobody said anything about it. No one said anything about it. But we both felt awful. Also, since my dad was serving in Iraq and my mom worked the night shift, we had to resort to a babysitter from time to time. I know it was ridiculous for a 14-year-old to hire a nanny, but my mom believed in it. Because it was necessary. Besides, the nanny was only 5 years older than me, so I enjoyed our conversations and time together. For a while, he slept in the guest room until I realized he was asleep. But one day when I asked her why she wasn't sleeping in her room, she turned pale and quietly asked, "Hello. Have you ever been in the same situation as us? It happened in this house too." I looked puzzled, but then I remembered the garbage can incident. But I didn't answer it. He looked at me and said, "I don't know, but I think there is something in your guest room." I didn't answer anything and kept looking at him, and he continued. "One night I woke up. I thought something was wrong, got up and went to check on you. You were asleep. I went in. I went back to bed, lay down, and started to notice a figure. There was a doll on the nightstand looking at me, but I turned away. Then I heard a whispering voice from the window. I thought it was you again. But when I checked, we were both there." He joined the conversation and walked back to the couch, leaving me there. I was confused, but I didn't feel bad about that night. When I was 17 years old, I got a new dog. A Chihuahua slept in my sister's room. Every night he was with my sister. When I woke up, my sister stood over me and asked if she could sleep with me. I am afraid of dogs. I couldn't answer her because I had just woken up. So I slept with her in the morning. I asked the nurse, "What happened?" He answered, "I don't know." I fell asleep. The dog was sitting on my lap, just crying and looking out the window, and then he started barking at everyone. I picked him up and went back to your room. I didn't answer for a few days. I was still thinking about it, and only then realized that the babysitter I had earlier said I was the same way. There was whispering coming from the vents. A few weeks later, my cousins came to our house for a sleepover. One night, one of them slept in my sister's room, and the other slept in mine. I didn't dare sleep in the guest room. I didn't dare to sleep in the guest room. So I slept on the floor, and my cousin slept on my bed. Finally, I fell asleep. This is my room. When I woke up in the middle of the night, it was completely dark, but the bedroom door was open. I got up from the deck. I stand up. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt nervous. I kept looking at him. There was a robot dog in the closet. It is connected to an iPod and can listen to music. Sound played from the speakers on his back to the beat of the music. He showed some movements and colors lit up in front of his face. Green is happy. Yellow. Yellow is calm. Red is angry. When he was angry, I tried not to touch him. For weeks. I left it on a shelf at the end of the closet because the batteries were dead, and I didn't have any new ones. When I looked in the closet, I felt warm and saw the dog's pale face. I saw the dog's face turn red. It was barking and pacing back and forth. I turned toward my cousin to wake him up, but he was within my reach. I was too scared to move, so I just sat there and watched. And finally it stopped. I didn't see the rest of that night and the morning. I threw the dog in the trash can. Since then, I've been closing the closet door on a string and eating what I have. A change of clothes or something. But then I noticed the window next to the closet. The closet. I'm not just telling you about it now. I had almost forgotten about it. Because recently, my boyfriend spent the night at Lloyd's. I'm 25 now, and I still live at home. I'm staying home after graduation, and my sister lives in New York, mostly because of school. My dad and aunt recently split up, so my aunt moved out, and my mom went somewhere with her girlfriends, so it's usually just me and my boyfriend. I sleep in the guest room because my room only has a bed for one person, and my boyfriend likes to take up space. My boyfriend likes to take up space when we move around at night. One night, my mom went away for the weekend. I had just gotten out of the bathroom and walked into the room where my boyfriend was checking the ventilation system. "What are you doing?" he said. "Hey, I thought I'd seen something like this before, but this wasn't anything new. But maybe it was a mistake or something, and you have trouble with that sort of thing." So I didn't really care. I fell asleep right away, and I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But then I woke up in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, because I had a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare because I recently had PTSD. I've been having a lot of them lately. I have nightmares about white underwear, but yeah. I woke up and saw my boyfriend snoring. I got up to take my pills and went back to my room. When I came back, my boyfriend was standing under the fan. I looked accusingly at Lee and said, "Are the bedbugs back?" He didn't answer. Then I sat down on the bed. The only source of light in the room was the moonlight from the window. I said, "Honey, you can go back to bed." But he didn't answer. Then I said, he was embarrassed. "My mom is out of town," he said. He gathered his thoughts, then said, "That's the strangest thing I've ever heard. But is it true that she asked for help?" "What do you mean?" I asked shyly. At that moment, I heard a low cry, "Help!" But the sound came as if from a vent. We thought he must be asleep. Finally. But we went straight to bed, at least until the next weekend. My boyfriend fell asleep first, and I continued reading. When I was about to fall asleep, I heard my sister calling my name. I looked up, but there was nothing there. So I went back to sleep. Then I heard my sister calling my name again. This time the voice was clearer, and I looked closer. Judging from the direction of the sound, it was coming from the ventilation system. I kept looking. I waited, and lo and behold, I heard it. I realized it was a whisper, and immediately woke up my boyfriend to tell him about it. He tried to calm me down by telling me that I had overslept a week ago. Since then, he hasn't stayed overnight at my place because I don't want to sleep in the guest room, and he doesn't want to sleep in my room. Which is wrong. What's wrong? But I feel like he's the one. This man is not my Vince. I'm just waiting for him to show up. But try to lure me in with something. Then I'll tell you. As soon as possible. I'm leaving now. It's frustrating, but I want to succeed. Especially from someone who's been there. I had a very strange experience last year in the National Forest and in California. I was traveling alone with my dog into the middle of nowhere in the national forests. I love hiking in national parks and forests because it makes me feel like I'm alone, and so does my dog. You get to walk and the dog is free. It's a compromise between bad roads and rough terrain. Sometimes it's parks because they're not groomed and maintained. So I took the dirt road that winds around the mountain. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and the weather outside was pretty clear. It was warm and there was a light breeze blowing. Nothing much happened, but I felt very uneasy driving to that area, and that feeling didn't go away while I was driving. Hill climb. I knew I shouldn't have stayed there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it, until my phone went off, until my phone rang, so I couldn't see anything on it. I pulled over, got out of the car with my dog, and looked over the curb at the dead squirrels and broken glass mixed with dirt and gravel on the road. Your car. My dog starts growling softly. He's alive. But you've rarely seen or heard a squirrel growl. I've never seen or heard him growl at another dog or anyone else. I've seen him complain about posturing. Nothing. Maybe he smelled something. Anything can happen here. But it's very stressful. But I pride myself on being an independent traveler and tourist. So I decide to stay a little longer with the growling puppy to see if I can find a good campsite. Sure, I've seen dead animals, but remember, 5 miles per hour. No one runs over 10 miles per hour is what I mean. Besides, if there were people here. I hear human voices quite close by. I stopped, but immediately froze and felt like I shouldn't stop. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. People were nowhere to be seen. I got back in the car and continued driving slowly, looking outside. Where were the strange sounds coming from? While I was in the national park and forest, I didn't see any other people. My senses grew in proportion to the sounds that came and went. A few times I gave up and started to turn the car around. I honestly don't remember what I was doing during the descent. That's because I was so focused on getting out of there. I distinctly remember standing by the car and being startled by the growling, but for some reason I thought it was dangerous. I quickly walked down the hill and saw no one. I finally decided to splurge and stayed in a hotel for the night. Everything seemed fine to me, and the only thing I was afraid of was the wide open spaces. I said to myself, the voice sounded quite close, only coming from somewhere far away. The animals were dead. The glass was shattered. Nothing's happening. It's chilling, but I remember this place, and it's always with me when I watch horror movies, when I walk my dog through the forest at night. There is no other place like it. I have to admit that I am curious and even scared by the feeling I get when I climb this mountain. However, I recently came across some information, including local laws, American law, and I'm very curious to look into the matter. When I told some people about this place, I was under the impression that it was haunted, but nothing more. I Googled national parks. I didn't see anything special there. I love horror movies, etc. I love nature, so I was interested in this little incident. My friend and I finished our trip. Just yesterday, we were at a wedding in Wyoming. There were only a few people there. It had been a few hours and the sun was already setting. So we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. However, from the Stay Awake podcast, I got on the X-Files and got a video of a true horror story involving Native Americans. I listened half-heartedly. I was petting my dog and playing Pokemon on an emulator. Then I heard the narrator's voice. Vending was mentioned. He told me very simply what they were. They can mimic sounds. This is what I call the worst frosty story I have ever encountered in my life. A shiver ran down my back, and I looked at my boyfriend and wondered if he remembered. I was in a national forest last year that left me terrified. He said he remembered and recalled texting me about it. I must have been close to the Wendigo and respected his input. And he did respect it. I remembered his words too, but I didn't know their laws very well and thought he was just joking. I think it was Bigfoot. He's following you or something. It wasn't. It was mostly a joke. He said it on purpose because he said he heard voices that I couldn't find. Things are weird. I typed Wendigo into Google and found more. Others, however, claim they are able to mimic human voices, and they live in the area, and that's where it all became clear. I tried to find more reputable sites and genuine reviews, though there's obviously a lot of questionable information out there too. Subsequently, I specifically looked for information about missing people in the area, but the first headline that caught my eye was about another missing family. No, I also looked at websites and news articles about missing people, but they were all hidden to some degree, like national park websites, pictures of trees and such. But about a year ago, I remember searching the woods, finding nothing, and realized that not enough stories like this were being told. I couldn't help but use my intuition. Over 100 people have gone missing in the last 8 years. They are nowhere to be found, and many of the ones I have found are dead. All of these things stimulate my intuition. I remember how anxious I was, how I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I was so scared and uncomfortable. From what I've learned, my dog and I are very close. It was actually a stray dog that started following me one day, but I picked him up and brought him back from Costa Rica. So it's been a little while. Skakes, we jumped on the track. Not only that, but I knew something was wrong. Yes, I've done a lot of ridiculous trips, both at home and abroad, and I have to say I've never had an experience this bad. But I've seen an inordinate amount of dead animals in national forests. I find that odd. I don't think I'll ever travel the solar system again, except for the sake of civilization. Does anyone know of authentic Native American traditions or have had similar unexplained experiences? For example, the cutoff point if you're in a bad mood in a national forest in California. Inside, I've dealt with marijuana all my life, but this is the first time I've ever told anyone about what happened to me. It was a few years ago, and I want to share it with you to answer some questions. I was living with my parents at the time, and I was probably 19 or 20 years old. I think I had 2 cats. They slept in my room at night. Another thing worth mentioning is that I had a bed in my room. There was a dresser on the wall opposite the door at the foot of the bed, and to the left of the dresser was a closet. So, the corner opposite my bed. My ceiling fan had a remote control to control the lights. Very cool, especially for me, who hated getting up to turn off the lights in the house. It was the middle of November. It was. I don't even remember what time I woke up. I just know it was the middle of the night. I don't know. Why did I wake up all of a sudden? But when I woke up, I heard a noise in my closet. I had a little box in there, and the door on the left was open so the cat could go in and out. So I thought it was the noise of one cat in the closet. But when I turned around, my son was next to me where he always sleeps. I lifted my head up. I lifted up a little to see what kind of cat it was. In the darkness, I saw his silhouette at the foot of the bed. I was really tired and honestly didn't want to get up in the middle of the night. And my head fell back on the pillow. Mind you, I've been dealing with strange things all my life, so I didn't pay attention to the noise in the closet. I was still asleep. I heard something slide across the floor from the closet to the edge of the bed. Website. My voice sounded like a stuffed toy or cat toy sliding across the floor. I looked over and saw that the 2 cats were asleep, and I was having a panic attack. The darkness was as inconspicuous as possible. I ran to find the switch for the lamp. I quickly found it and pressed the button, but nothing. Then I felt something. I jumped to the foot of the bed. It was about the size of a cat. In other words, it was a small animal. Like this. What happened at that moment was I was so scared that I don't remember what happened to the cat. Either he woke up and ran away, or we weren't hurt. But there was something moving on my bed. I felt pressure and movement of the sheets. I pressed the white button, but nothing happened. That was the end of it. The creature suddenly pounced on me and scratched me, but I screamed, hoping my parents were downstairs. They appeared in the hallway and rescued me. I don't know if my screams were actual words like help, or if they were scary words. I screamed loudly, but it seemed to me that the creature had fur or wool, but I couldn't really see it. Maybe because I closed my eyes out of fear, or maybe because it was too dark. Or maybe it was something else. But the creature spoke to me. I don't remember exactly what it sounded like, but it spoke. October, it said. It was already obvious. Confusion added to my fear. It was November, not October. The title was indeed October. When I tried to tell them anything about October, I couldn't suspect anything at that moment. So I just yelled. Then the scratching suddenly stopped and it just disappeared. I mean, the creature is very simple. It literally disappeared right before my eyes. I pressed the button again and the light finally came on. I still don't remember where the cat went, and I don't even remember falling asleep. But what I do remember is this. The next morning I had a scratch on my stomach. But here's where things get even weirder. When I told my parents about it, and more importantly, asked them why they didn't run away when I did, they yelled at me. They said they had never heard me yell at them. Yes, Mom told me. He woke up to the feeling of someone chasing him. He looked up, and those eyes were staring at him. True across the room. He explained to me that those eyes were like allies, and that the silhouette looked like a small animal. Then my father told me about a dream he had in which he dreamed of a furry, living creature, but I don't remember anything else, and I don't know what it was, what kind of creature it was, what it wanted, and most importantly, what does it mean? October. Is it a demon or just sleep paralysis? I often doubt my own sanity on this subject, but my parents had similar experiences, and my experience confirms it. My experience also confirms it. Does anyone have a similar experience or any information about what these creatures are? Significance. This experience still gives me goosebumps. So, a little backstory. First off, my ex-boyfriend and I are still very close. Friends, and sometimes friends with benefits. He and I occasionally go out with friends. His, please. I just went out for drinks with my ex-boyfriend, Cotter, and his friend Paul, but recently, 2 days ago. So they cut themselves, and Paul didn't say a word. At 7:30 Sunday morning, Cotter wanted to have a drink with me because he was due to go on temporary sick leave, but I couldn't do that. So I went and got to know Pablo a little bit. He's 22 years old. He's 22, and he just broke up with his girlfriend of N years and decided to avoid relationships altogether. He's a bit quiet. He has a nice egg-shaped face and beautiful blue eyes. His blonde hair is styled and he wears maniacal glasses reminiscent of BTK Killer. Usually it's Cards and Paul. And Paul offered me a ride home. He'd lost his license and was taking a course to get it back. But I didn't feel like driving home. Besides, it was going to be a very hot day, so I agreed. He followed me. Go home and ask him if I could stop and do it early. He walked away from me, but I refused. In fact, I only sleep with his friends because it makes him happy, and I just want to make God happy. I'm really sorry. He left me and he told me. He said he was calling me to play with me. Once he explained that he didn't want a relationship at all, I was happy, she added. I was on Snapchat, but he never tried to talk to me and I thought he was just faceless. Sex cards for money. Problem. But today I woke up at 2:30 a.m. and Paul was sitting on my bed. Paul squeezed my leg and I woke up. At first I thought it was because my brother JJ sometimes has nightmares. Then he comes to my room, but then I thought it was weird if he grabbed my thigh to wake me up. So I opened it. Well, I don't let him. I'm just looking at him. He texted me, and I came in. You didn't text him after he left. I looked at my phone too, just in case. And I was right. We didn't talk at all, but I did. I was very upset and didn't quite understand the situation. I told him it was getting late, turned my back to him, and asked him to leave. Are you sure you don't want me to stay here? Are you sure you're okay? I am. Hang out. He kept his hand on my thigh. The whole time I was conscious. By now I was fully awake, and my gut was telling me this was a bad idea. I kept telling him he had to leave, and finally he got up and told me to call him tomorrow. I muttered. It didn't make any difference. "Aye, go to hell." He stood there for a bit and then asked me, "Shall I go to his car?" I said no, but he asked if I was sure. I didn't want to let him go, and oddly enough, he did ask for it. But I said, "I'm not going anymore." So I went to bed, and then I had to get up. At 6:45 a.m., I heard him walking down the hall, and my heart finally calmed down a little, until he came back. "Yeah, there's someone downstairs, so I need you to stay with me." Okay, at this point I was beyond excited. Paul was on his way. He broke into my dream house. He had the nerve to drag me out of the house he'd just broken into. I'm not getting out of bed. Just walk out the back door. No one's gonna say anything. Okay, he got the hint. I went downstairs and heard it. The door closed. To make sure, he waited a half hour and then went downstairs. Then he left and made sure the door was locked too. I told my aunt. When he woke up at 4 o'clock, I told her what had happened and asked her to hit him next time. I texted Connor what happened, and I don't want to tell my dad or uncle what happened. I don't want them to tell. I don't want them to blame Connor, but I know they have to. But it happened to me. It was very strange, especially to us regulars. Paul thought about it for a while. I thought it was an overreaction because I didn't care if Paul was allowed or not. My hand showed that this was no ordinary person. I wouldn't have done that. And it's not my fault, or Kat's fault. It's not Kat's fault. I'll ask JJ tomorrow in my room. Okay, Paul, I will. So today I'm staying at a hotel about 400 kilometers from home. I've been in this town for a few days now, but last night I changed hotels because the other hotel was moldy. I still didn't like it. It was dirty. I came here to take my brother to university, and tonight was the last night he spent with us. Before we left, we decided to have a silly fight in the hotel parking lot. We ran around outside the hotel a lot and just had fun. Silly teenagers. Someone was standing on the stairs leading up to the second floor of the motel watching us. But it wasn't a big problem. I think we ended up being pretty loud and annoying. But my brother and my mom left. They took my brother to a hostel and I decided to stay in the hotel room. For the last 3 days, all I did was drive around. I needed some rest because for the last 3 days, all I did was drive. So I decided to rest. I tried calling my friends, but that didn't work, so I talked to Adrian. Just in case someone knocked on the door. Just like my mom, we have a stupid secret knocker in our house. I tried to open the door like I usually do, 19, because I was sure it was my mom. But something told me to look at the eye socket, and about the person. Behind the door was the same person who had been watching us on the stairs. Now I'm very, paranoid. So it's clear. I just hadn't opened the door and I was starting to worry. I spoke quietly to Adrian, and he yelled for me to open the door and started banging on it really hard. I sat there. I talked quietly to Adrian for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then I slowly made my way to the door. And just as I was about to face someone, all of a sudden this man put his whole body on the door and started shaking the knob angrily. By this point, I had texted my brother no less than 30 times on Snapchat, so he comes back to the hotel, says it's a 10-minute walk, and sits there until exhausted. I came back, he came back, and when I got back, the guy was gone. After everything that happened, I'm still in shock from the incident. In the evening when I was leaving, I went to the front desk. Take my brother to the youth hostel. I decided to go with him. When I got back to the hotel, I said that if anyone asked me for my room key, I would not give it to them. At this motel, you don't have to completely prove that you are staying here. All you have to do is ask. It's a digital room key, and apparently, they just give them away, and apparently the paranoia was justified. According to the receptionist, the same person came and asked me for my room key. My room key. What would have happened if I had opened the door? I don't know what would have happened if I had opened the door or if they had taken my room key. But I don't want to know. There's a walking path near my school. It's about 1 kilometer to the top, and you can see the whole valley. So, I went there one Saturday with a friend. The sun had already set. We had just started our 2-mile hike down. It was a terrible time, but luckily we knew the way. But it still felt good. I'm scared, because it's dark and I'm a little paranoid. I'm not very observant. Be careful. But I can hear my friends. I have bad eyesight. I looked, but I didn't see anything. "Hey, it's a girl," my boyfriend said. I was scared. I was scared because there was no one on the trail at 9 o'clock. When we got closer, I saw that she was sitting on the ground like a pile of leaves with her knees drawn up to her chest. She was rocking back and forth too, wearing only a pink nightgown, even though it was February. Yes, she was my friend, and I insisted that someone was making a terrible journey, into the woods or something. It made me feel bad because it actually happened to my friend. One day we were discussing whether he needed help. Does he need help? And then my friend saw that he had a knife in his lap. I thought it was time for me to move on, and I got even more scared. We're gaining momentum, but we still think the girl might have just tripped. But we joke that it must have been a terrible trip, a night in the woods to calm down. We joke about things like, but here's this one man. He's driving down the road and asks if he's seen a girl. It wasn't a girl. She was dressed like a girl, but we said no. We hadn't seen her. Because we panicked when we thought we saw a girl running away from her captors. Or, you guessed it, something like that. After that, we just jogged. Unfortunately, we parked our car there, but I called them and reported what I saw, and they searched us. But so far, we don't know anything new. I don't know what happened in those woods, even if I did. By the way, my cell phone was out of range until I got to my car. I saw the girl about a mile from the car as the sun was already setting. Besides, there was no way to follow her because it was too dark. Besides, we were a group of 2 women and 1 man. We had nothing with us, for self-defense, in case we didn't find anything. Honestly, it was a very scary situation. We froze with fear, and I don't know if someone used this woman to lure us here or if it was... I think it was what happened. But we did everything we could to protect ourselves. Like I said, I have no idea. I don't know what happened there, but it was weird. It only happened a few months ago, so I'm loving it. Facebook probably likes memes. I like interacting with new people. I like long comment sections, and all that kind of stuff. Despite that, I don't share any personal information. I don't share details about where I work, where I live, or when my birthday is, and so on. Although I don't know them personally, I have made a few friends who share my views and communicate well. I've been commenting on my friends' posts for a while now. I wasn't surprised when I got an email from Tyler. At first it was simple. We just talked about the post I commented on, about the sights and stuff. Honestly, I was glad to have a new friend and found him quite interesting, and we had a lot in common. I'm not a beauty queen or anything, I'll tell him. After half an hour of casual conversation, I was happy. I liked his friendship, but it didn't lead to anything more. It wouldn't lead to anything more, because I'm getting married next year. Anyway, to be honest, he seemed a little upset. He was mostly respectful, and that was fine with me. I said goodnight to him. I went to bed and didn't think about anything. The argument went on for a few days. He was a bit stubborn. I didn't answer right away and said, smiling at him, "I'm very busy, I can't always answer right away," he said. He apologized for that and said he was just bored and lonely. He didn't take a step back, and I started to pull away from him little by little, because I felt sorry for him being lonely. But then one day he sent me a random text. He wanted to hug me, but I quickly stopped him and reminded him of our relationship. And I told him that if he didn't stop, our friendship was over. Not with someone else. Then he immediately stopped texting me, told me he didn't care about my fiancée, and threatened to take her away or something. I stopped. Since then, I stopped contacting him and decided to ignore his messages. He was still able to text me, but the emails never made it to my inbox. Furthermore, when I wrote an article about it, a friend of mine told me in the comments that he did the exact same thing to her, but he also knew where she lived and showed up on her doorstep. At that point, I panicked and went to see if there were any more messages from him. He said I should call the police about the threat. That's when I started having serious problems. He sent me over 10 messages. They were all different. First, he mocked me for not answering. Then, he texted me about his car breaking down and I thought it was too late. Then he said he was going to shoot the guy. And he did. It was my fault, because I ignored him and pissed him off. So I texted him. He asked me not to respond for a while, but he texted me and wanted to know where I lived. That really freaked me out. I never talked about where I live or anything like that, not even near my house. I only said one thing. I talked to him later because when I went into Arby's to buy food, my phone's battery was already dead. Somehow he noticed it. I was a 7-minute walk from Arby's, not far from home at all. This was what I needed to get to. And it was this. There are several Arby's in my town. Then he started going through a limited number of streets. I ended by saying, "But I know Downs." My address was associated with a 4-door black sedan, but it wasn't in my name. It was in my sister's name when she registered it as a new bar. That was enough for me. So I made the call. The emergency services. The police, of course, wanted to do nothing, saying they couldn't do anything until he showed up. I didn't care if he sent me pictures of a dead body. Then he said he was going to be my family, and forbade me from introducing him to him until he showed up. I was completely confused. All I could do was ask for protection, and that's exactly what I did. They kept texting, and I told him I already had a protection order. Tell him to leave me alone. To which he said, "I can't do anything until he comes." Until he comes, he signed, which he did. His fiancée works in information technology and has a cousin who is good with technology and was able to find out Tyler's last few known addresses. Tyler's address, but the police couldn't find it. They found out the license plate number, address, full name, and birthday. Address, full name, birthday. And yet he seems to be completely untraceable. Oddly enough, he paused for a moment. But after I came to court, P.O.'s sentence was extended by 2 years. He started again. My fiancé. He had a history of intimidation, and he said someone might come after him. He said he would be shot in 15 minutes. His last address was 15 minutes away from my house, which was also very scary. I spent the last few months in complete terror, and he was arrested and put in jail. I think he was in a hurry or something and stood out. Incidents like this happened to him several times. All charges were dropped and dismissed. There's no doubt about that. But he also did the same thing to my friends who came to my courthouse. Criminal charges. He handled everything from felonies to misdemeanors. The disorderly conduct charge carries a maximum sentence of 12 months in jail, depending on his behavior. Because he couldn't prove that it was him sitting behind the keyboard and not someone else, especially me. I never saw his face. In real life, before his sentencing, there were 2 people who received messages from him and saw his face. And his face. Bottom line. Now I can't sleep. The slightest noise wakes me up, and I panic. It's just hell for my family. I sincerely hope it all ends, because it will be over soon. When I was little, about 7 years old, I lived with my mom and sister. We had a very loving father, but that same mother, my father and mother, divorced a few years ago and lived separately. My father lived about 2 hours away, but after the divorce, my mother started seeing other people, so I saw my father every weekend. But things weren't going well at this point. I would also like to point out that my mother used alcohol a lot. He had a hard life, and alcohol didn't help. I had to deal with it. So I got over it. I'm a little better now. I remember waking up one morning, going to my mother's room and seeing a strange man in her bed. He was fine. He was fine. It was just a date, and I probably wouldn't see him again. But after that, I never saw John again. He never left our lives, and my mom and I had just started dating. Work was going really well at first, and then he left me and my sister, who's 6 years older than me. When my mother died, they lived in his house. He gave us sweets and stuff, all kinds of things. But over time, I don't remember exactly when, John became violent. To be honest, I was still young. It all seems so vague now. But I remember that he and my mother fought a lot. He broke things in the house, and in some cases, he even hit my own mother. But later I found out that he used to grab my mother's earrings and put a samurai sword to her throat every time they fought. He'd leave the house at 3 in the morning, and my mother would come after him sometime later. I think it was a little after him, but my sister and I stayed there. 13. Inside, look after me and get me ready for school. After school, I went outside. When I went outside, John, my mom, and I were waiting for the car. I was always scared. He is still in our lives. You might think that's the scariest part of this story. No, John was in this men's organizing club. I don't want to name it for reasons of anonymity, but it was kept secret. He was never allowed to talk about it. Not to his mother, not to us, not even about what happened on the date. Women weren't allowed to be present either. And that was the only event. Around the same time, there was an annual event for women that my mother attended. My grandmother, who lived very close to us, started dating a man named Kenny. Kenny was also a member of this organization. He and John were very close. My mom strongly believes that Kenny and John knew each other before she met my nanny and my mom. Kenny also abused my babysitter. The abuse was, he knocked her teeth out once. Kenny and John's friendship ended one night when my mom and John were visiting my grandmother. I visited my grandmother. Kenny lost me, and my sister and I visited his father. My mom remembered me telling Kenny I was going to make him a roast dinner tomorrow. I heard Kenny and John talking, but I didn't even have time to turn around to see what was going on. He felt 2 punches on his neck. John pushed him away and yelled at him to run. Then, he turned around. He saw Kenny stab John 8 times. He had somehow managed to get out the front door with the nanny. Only then did the mother realize she had been stabbed twice in the neck. The police arrived and Kenny was arrested. Mother and John were taken to the hospital. Luckily, they both survived. It's unknown why Kenny suddenly became hostile and stabbed his mother and John Lou. But frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it had something to do with the organization. The organization they share. After the trial, we never saw Kenny again. But we knew that he might be committed to a psychiatric hospital. He claimed his mental illness drove him to murder and laughter. Kenny died. My grandmother, who was actually schizophrenic, came to live with us. For a while. Until he felt safe enough to come home. I guess Kenny was a real pain in the ass. Finally. Even with Kenny gone, John was still around. He made our lives a living hell. He was always mean, hitting my mom and getting mad at me and my sister. One day, I fell and broke a pot of mustard. I remember my mom and I got scared and froze. I was afraid of what it was. John's reaction to his sister John, who is a little older than me, remembers many frightening things. One night, he sat on my bed while I was with my dad. He told me where else he might be. My sister was visiting my mom. One day, he asked what was wrong, and John told him that his mother had just been exposed, literally, in front of a 16-year-old kid. He was a victim of sexual abuse. He used to make me and my mom walk around the neighborhood in the middle of the night if we pissed him off. My sister doesn't remember why, but one day John got scared and upset and ran away from home. He developed bear-like powers. When she got to her father's house, it was a 10-minute walk away. John was already waiting for her and said, "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." She left before John did, because she left the house before he did, and hurried to her father's house. The only way he could do that was to leave the house before John. If he had rushed to his mother's house, he would have looked very strange and eccentric. When he was with Joanna, he did something he had never done before. He seemed to be suffering from some kind of mental disorder. Something was wrong, or something. At the time, We thought it was John's violence and alcohol, but in recent years, he admitted that he really thought it was. John surprises him. As a result, they even got married at night in front of 2 witnesses. Both are mysterious. Anna's Etienne, come to think of it, was a bit of a blur in the wedding photos, and we were the only ones. A week later, I found out they got married. He didn't get along with her either. He used to tell us about it. Every time we went to a bachelorette party, he couldn't remember one night. In fact, John made a creepy remark about his sister when she was about 13. "You're old enough. I'll buy you a nice dress and we'll go to a girls' night out together." My sister was very embarrassed when he said this and said she didn't like the idea. Then he just said no, go away. He said the same thing to me when I was 10 and said I could go when I was older. I remember I was looking forward to buying a dress and going to the secret clubs my mom went to. But later, I found out that my mom didn't remember the girls' night out. I was so happy because I never had the chance to go. I could have gone. I was 11 years old when I woke up to my mother screaming. Okay, John died. He was diabetic, but he wasn't very good at controlling his insulin levels, and he was dying from excess fluid in his lungs. It was the worst and best day of my life. I would never wish death on anyone, but when John died, he died. I felt like a lump had been pulled out of my chest. I know, it's horrible for an 11-year-old kid. I shudder every time I think about what our lives would have been like if he had lived, and all in all, we might have survived. Would we have survived? There's something else I'd like to add to this story. John was badly beaten. So badly that several ribs were broken, and John called the police. But the culprit wasn't found until a few months ago. We talked to his father, and he finally admitted that the man who beat up John was his father's brother. Apparently everyone knew about it, even John. But no one reported it to the police. Everyone thought John had gotten it. This happened about 25 years ago. That's right. I apologize in advance if, it's not as detailed as I'd like it to be. I want to be as specific as possible. If you have any questions or comments that require more detail, I'd be happy to answer them. So, I was 7 years old and my sister was 5, and we got off the school bus hand in hand, excited for the first week of school and ready to tell my mom everything. We turned the corner. When we pulled up to the house, there were no cars in the driveway. My sister talked excitedly about the teachers, new friends, and the playground. But for some reason, I felt a little uneasy. Mom wasn't there. Mom was always waiting for us with fallen fruits and vegetables. So I had a head start, but the no junk food rule threw me off as a kid. But now I'm very grateful for it. Maybe the car idea is stupid, but not everyone is a genius. I'm only 7 years old. As soon as I reached the intersection of the porch and driveway, I realized there was no car. The front door was closed, so my mom wasn't there, but as is often the case in our neighborhood, we weren't high schoolers. But I had my house key just in case. I always wondered what my parents were thinking when they gave me that key. But maybe that's exactly what they were thinking. I let go of the little hand. My sister let go of mine, knelt down at the bottom of my backpack bag and pulled out the key. I was a little nervous. I have to admit that I have a very good memory. And as I stood up to open the door, I froze. From inside the house, a figure dressed head to toe in black was staring at me. Black. The camouflage was perfect, and there was nothing around the eyes to indicate the person's race. I stopped with my keys in my hand. I didn't feel like going in, but the figure shook his head back and forth as if to say no. I put the keys down and asked the nurse to announce me. It wasn't a total loss. What to do in a situation like this? I took the nurse to the backyard. There was a swing with a rope. With a swing. I told her we were just waiting for Mom. That certainly wasn't part of the conversation. Discussion. Sitting on the swing, I realized I had wet my pants. I had wet my pants. My sister asked me what happened, but I'm not good at lying. Strength. I told her there was someone in the house. He looked confused and said it was a friend of his father's, my Osterhaus. He replied that he knew. He just knew. I told him I'm still waiting for my mom, but it's weird. I don't know. How long had I been waiting? I was scared, hungry, and uncomfortable in wet pants. Everyone in the house. I went out the back door. After a while, my dog sniffed the house because he was happy to welcome us. The back fence had been updated. Everyone in his house knew that the dog had to be kept on a leash and not just let go. They were free to run and escape through the gaps. When Sonny arrived, his sister was ready to enter the house, and why not? They didn't fight, but the kids exchanged playful insults such as idiot, stupid, dumb, and so on. But I managed to win the fight because of my age. Mom finally pulled out of the driveway, and Sonny and I headed straight for her. I succumbed to the tears I had held back for so long. The only thing that brought me out of my tantrum was calling my mom at home. There I was finally able to talk about black people, and my sister told me about my dad's friends. Then, Mom said, and we all walked back to the car. It was sunny. We drove a few blocks to my friend's house. The police were called. We were questioned together and separately, and I went home with my mom. She and an officer looked through the house and found everything that had been destroyed, mostly in the basement and my parents' bedroom. But the strangest thing was if there was anything there at all. My mother didn't know what it was, and my father pretended to be innocent. Nothing like that ever happened after that. I asked my mom, "Do you remember? Do you remember?" She said it was better to leave the past in the past. Honestly, I've never been so scared, and I hope it never happens again. This is my father's story, and I want to make it clear that to me he is an ex-British man. He's not afraid of anything. He's a very practical man, and he became a truck driver. I became a driver in about 1975. I think it was just after I started working. It was a summer day, about 5 o'clock in the morning. It was a little foggy, like in the morning, but bright. He was driving a lorry out of London on the A3, and in front of him sat a young woman in her early 20s wearing a long blue dress. She was standing on the sidewalk in a long blue dress. This should have happened earlier. The A3 road was decorated and all the barriers in place. Anyway, my father saw her and thought he was waiting for a driver's license or something, but then it was time. Seal. Popping out in front of her is Lorian. She immediately hits the brakes. For example, she's sure she was hit, but she didn't feel the impact. But where else? He was right. Several cars stopped to look, and my dad explains what happened while spreading his hands. The drivers kindly ask him to stay while they look under the truck. My father looks, but they are gone. The other drivers. They point their fingers, but there's nothing there. No bodies, no blood, no sign of people. Everyone's in shock. A little bit. Because they saw the woman too and decided to drive away. Because it was the best thing they could do. He still can't explain it, but he knows he was there. And they left him. That's how he spent the rest of his journey. Avoid that circle. So he never told anyone about the ghost encounter at his father's old house. It was at my father's old house, and I haven't talked about it officially in years. I think you did. We bought a nice house in 2004. In 2005, we had a big backyard and went on vacation. Quiet neighborhood with no historical significance, as far as I know. But I haven't checked it out after living there, so I'm not too sure. I've checked out the garden a few times since moving in. And my friends, there was an old path in the center of the garden. I followed it and discovered the remains of an old abandoned barn. I always thought it had something to do with our house or site, our home and site, a connection to this old abandoned forest shelter. But I could never explain it. When I explained it to my father, he didn't believe me. He was being persecuted or something. His parents were Catholic, like mine. We never watched paranormal shows, but sometimes re-watched our favorite horror movies. Around this time, my father bought a house. Shortly after that, he got married. Shortly after that, when he married his wife and she moved in with my father, she brought her youngest son with her, and there was nothing unusual about that. Nothing out of the ordinary. Over the next year, their marriage was falling apart, to say the least. To say the least, there was constant fighting, and I was constantly being replaced by my brother-in-law. When I visited them on weekends, I'll never forget one evening when my brother and I walked into the kitchen. As usual, we discussed the possibility of divorce with my father and mother and asked them questions. Something very strange happened in the house. He told me he was playing video games. I was playing with the door open, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him. He said he heard it too. Someone was walking on the carpet in the hallway. I immediately brushed it off, he said. But I thought he was just trying to scare me or something. A few weeks have passed since then. My father's ex-wife left the house and took some things with her. There were a few spare rooms in the house. One of them was next to my bedroom. But the house was built very long horizontally. The bedroom and the guest room were on one side of the house. The kitchen and living room were on one side of the house, and my father's room and another room were on the other side of the house. Guest room. Both sides of the house were connected by one long hallway. And finally I entered. Leave him alone. And then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I was about to visit my father when I realized that everything was moving. In the middle of the night, I heard unpleasant voices. Of course, the footsteps were coming from the hallway outside my bedroom, but after a while I had no other choice. Finally, I couldn't ignore them. One weekend day, I told my father about it. What I experienced confirmed my father's experiences. We started documenting everything. Word document at home. Just the links. I wish I still had it, but one day I lost it. We heard numbers, voices, footsteps, lights going on and off. But no one was there. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. I was terrified. We started hearing people walking on the walls, especially in the empty room next to our bedroom, and quiet conversations in the room. I got scared in the middle of the night. I watched it all night until the sun came up the next morning, and I was bleeding. To drown out the unexplained and scary sounds, I turned on the radio and TV. As my grades improved, I started telling my story to my school friends. And I told you my story. One weekend, I decided to invite my friends over for a visit. See for yourself about what was going on in the house. He came home, went into my room, and brought his stuff. We went from the bedroom to the living room, which was still next to the bedroom. He then began downplaying the importance of activities in the house, claiming they were impractical. Note, even as a child, I was terrified of an empty bedroom. I always closed the door when I was home, so he kept teasing me about it. Until I heard the doorknob turn in the hallway and the creak of the door opening. Of course, I almost needed a new one. When I looked out into the hallway and noticed a half-open door to an empty room, the house was in turmoil. My dad and I even had our peace of mind tested by the local paranormal team. The results matched ours. They said they thought it was the spirit of a child. They never said anything bad, and honestly, I never got the feeling they were trying to hurt me. They were always playful and childish. They wanted to be left alone or something. In the end, we got the girls' EVP. My vote. I got goosebumps over the weekend during the investigation, but I don't know if it's still going on. After the investigation, I became even more worried. I didn't want to go to my father's house. I'm usually at home, and it became a big blow to our relationship with him. As for my personal health, I became afraid to stay home alone. I know it's silly to be afraid of ghosts, especially staying home on the weekends. A ghost baby. But I still don't know who or what it is. So, as always, this weekend at my dad's house, I was totally terrified, with heightened activity. And in that moment, I was ready. I dealt with it and put my rosary on the door railing. I was afraid to go to bed. So one day, in the middle of the night, I walked down a dark hallway and into a dark and empty room. I made a fire and shouted loudly, "You won't be able to scare me anymore. Welcome to this place. Get out. Go find your family and leave me alone." My heart was pounding. I ran out of the room, quickly turned off the light, and knocked on the door. There was a knock on the door. I will never forget what happened after that. The dream I had that night was no ordinary dream. I don't know what to call it, but when I dreamed it, I woke up in my room, just like when I left my room. As I fell asleep, I looked around the room and saw that the nightlight was on, and the radio was playing quietly. Literally everything looked exactly the same as when I was in my room at night. But somehow I realized it was a dream or something. Then I looked to the side. I looked at the door. It slowly opened, and there were 3 kids standing in the doorway looking at me. They were an older girl, about 10 years old, a younger girl about 5 or 6 years old, and a younger boy about 5 or 6 years old. They just sat there and watched me. It was like watching 19th century people taking pictures. They were like that. They looked so sad. And yet they had no emotion at all. As I recall, their clothes were from the late 1800s or early 1900s. They just sat there looking at me for what seemed like forever, until they lowered their eyes, turned around, and walked away. Then the dream ended. The dream ended. I woke up covered in sweat and realized that my room was exactly the same as it was in the dream. However, the door was closed. I didn't bother to get up and look down the hallway. Really, I'm glad I didn't, considering what happened tonight. As far as I understood my father's words, it was over. I didn't hear anything else. There have been no reports from this house or any of the other occupants other than us until today. I don't know what I was thinking, and I don't know if it was a dream or reality. Since then, I've always felt sensitive, and I always feel that way. Sometimes I have weird dreams similar to what happened to me in that house. It was real, but I still wanted to sleep. My father is angry with me. Of course he's angry. He's a ghost. To this day, I can't explain what happened to us.